Red Sea, a famous chapter. But I want to focus on in verse 10. In verses 10 through 12, it says, "And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there was no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell the Egyptians, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians, that we should die in the wilderness." Right here we see that the Israelites, they're on the brink of salvation. They're about to be delivered. They're about to, flee Egypt, free the bondage they once were in. And they see that there's trouble behind them. And they're like, just let us go back. Why are you trying to, free us, for instance? They're saying, we don't want to be free anymore. We want to just stay where we're at. Because they see a little bit of trouble, but they don't believe in God that he's able to deliver them. They don't remember all the plagues that God sent to Egypt. They don't remember all the things that God did for them. But they only remember this small instance right now of where they're at the brink of salvation and the Egyptians are right behind them and they're afraid. And they're afraid of it. And look at what it says here in verse 28. Verse 28, they're afraid so far. But look at what God does. "And the water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore." And you see right here, we see that God delivered them. They trusted in God. Well, not really, but you see that if you trust in God, God can deliver you. And you see the title of this message is Don't Be Israel. Now, when we say don't be Israel, this is what I mean. Don't complain and murmur and not trust in God like Israel. Look at Exodus chapter 16. Speaking of Exodus 14, it's just think about everything God did for them, leading up to the events of crossing the Red Sea, and they just want to forget all about that. It's like, Moses, why are you trying to free us? Just let us alone. They said, didn't we tell you just leave us alone, just let us stay here? We were content with being in bondage, helping the Egyptians, and being beat. We were content with that. Why are you trying to, free us? And think about how crazy that is. Think about how crazy that is. Like, I'm completely fine with just being, in bondage, but I'm right here. I'm about to be free, but I see a little bit of trouble. But you don't remember, when God gave all these plagues. You don't remember all this. But you remember there's one little bit of trouble right here. Look at Exodus chapter 16. You say, they stopped, at the last verse of 14, it says, that they feared and believed Moses. You say, well, that was it. There was no more complaining. There was no more murmuring. Look at verse 1 of Exodus 16. It says, "And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness." What happened to them believing Moses? Right. Verse 3, "And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." So, the Red Sea. Can we go back to the Red Sea? God, didn't God just deliver you? Didn't God just deliver you from this bondage? But you want to go back there because you ate bread to the full. Because you have this little bit of trouble, you just want to go back to bondage. Look at chapter 17. But you see, every time, the Israelites, they complain, God gives them the answer to their complaints. You know what God does? He gives them manna. He's like, we don't have food? All right, God's like, here's manna. And they ate angels' food. They ate heavenly food. But that wasn't enough for them, as we'll see. Look at chapter 17. Chapter 17, verses 1, it says, "And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandments of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink." Oh boy, another problem. "Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? So, you're reading Exodus, and you're kind of like, do they not remember, like, what God did with them, when they were in bondage? Do they not remember that God literally just delivered you out of bondage? God literally took you out of bondage and freed you. They don't remember that. They forgot all about that, because they're just thinking about this one little moment of like, we don't got food, we don't have water. Now you say, well, God answered this complaint too, because he gives them water to drink. And you say, well, that's it. No more complaining with the children of Israel. They learned their lesson. They learned that God is really going to deliver them. God is really on their side. They finally understood after all this time, the Red Sea, all the plagues. And now that God provided them with food and water, they understand, yeah, God is really, he's there for us. They understand that now. No, go to Numbers chapter 11. They didn't learn their lessons. They still were complaining. They still didn't understand anything. What's the title of this message? Don't be Israel. Don't be Israel in the sense of you're complaining. Because complaining can never get you anywhere. People complain about a lot of stuff like, oh man, I wish we could change this. I'm like, all right, then change it. If it's something you can change it. Now, some things, you can't change, like the government, things like that. But there's some other things, you can do it. You think about this whole BLM thing. Like, oh, we can't get a job. Like, yes, you can. And you think about like, man, it's so hard to live, because I just don't want to work, but just give me free money. No. You see, if you actually just went out and did something and not complain about, oh, racism, like, I'm not, nothing's hurting me. Like, I'm doing great. It's like, don't complain about something, but you don't want to have a solution for your complaints. There's just no point. You're just giving me worthless words, sentences. Like, oh, I'm so sick of my job. Like, yeah, I was sick of my job too. I found a new one. So you can't complain and then not have a solution. Because I would rather, like, I would tell my coworkers or boss, I would like, here, we have a problem right here. But I wouldn't just tell them the problem and not give them a solution. Because to me, that would make no sense. It's like, all right, I got you the problem. Now you figure out the solution. That would make no sense. I would rather, give him the solution, give him the problem and the solution. So that way he doesn't just have nothing else, leaving up for grabs. Like, well, I gave you the problem. Now you figure out the solution. That's what the children of Israel do. They're just complaining. But the thing is, they don't have to think for a solution because they have God. God is literally on their side. God's literally giving them commandments. He's like, here's how you're going to do this. But they didn't care. They didn't understand. They didn't see that God was on their side for some reason after all these signs. You would think after all these signs, they believed in the man of God. They believed in Moses. They believed in God. But no. Look at Numbers chapter 11, verses 1. It says, and when the people complained, so we're just starting off this chapter, complaining. And when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. And the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost part of the camp. So we see, first of all, the people were complaining in Exodus, and God, he had more grace, he had more mercy. But now God's getting sick and tired. It's like, why are you complaining now? How long is it going to take for these people to believe me? And look, the fire of the Lord burnt them in verse 1. Look at verse 2. And the people cried unto Moses, like, why are you crying to Moses? And when Moses prayed unto the Lord, the fire was quenched, and he called the name of that place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them. And a mixed multitude that was among them fell lusting, and the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? All right. They still don't learn the lesson. They still don't get it. They're still not there. Look at verse 5. We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all beside this manna before our eyes. There's nothing though. There was nothing all, I thought, but there's manna. See, here we have a change in complaint. They're not changed, because at first in Exodus, they're complaining that there was no food. Now they're complaining because the food they have is not what they want. So they're complaining about something they have. If you think about it, they're complaining about food they have, they're complaining about that, and they don't want that. They don't want what God gave them. That, to me, was kind of, I was reading, I was like, they're not complaining anymore about food. They're not complaining like we're starving. They're complaining like, God, we're sick of this manna. Can we get some meat, Can we get, I'm sick of this manna. I want the fish, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic that Egypt gave to us freely, even though we were being beaten and in bondage. This is what I want. Right? I want that. Not this manna. Not this freedom. I don't want that. Look at verse 10. Then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families. These people are weeping. They're crying because they have manna. They're crying because they don't have what they want. People weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. And Moses also was asleep. Now God is just mad. Because if you look at it in Exodus, again I said, God was more gracious. He was like, all right, watch back. I'll show you. Believe in me. Now God's like, you don't see the progress. You don't see what's happening right now. Like, you are being delivered. Everything is going well. But you don't see it. For some reason, you don't see that I'm with you. And God's like, how long is it going to take for these people to understand that I am with them? Look at verse 11. And Moses said unto the Lord, wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Moses is like, Lord, I can't take this anymore. Like, these people just don't trust me, and they don't trust you. I know they don't trust you. They don't trust me. These people keep crying. Look at verse 12. He says, have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten them? That thou shouldest say to me, carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth the sucking child unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? When shall I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, give us flesh, that we may eat. Moses is saying in verse 12, he's like, these children of Israel are literal kids. I have to hold them in their hand, like, all right, I'm going to help you. All right, I'm going to provide for you. But they don't believe it for some reason. Moses couldn't take the burden they were giving him. What ends up happening? God ends up giving them their answer, though. God ends up giving them their complaints. God ends up showing them, all right, you want a different piece of food? All right, I'll give you what you want. But the children of Israel were little children, if you think about it, because they're complaining, they're murmuring. They're like, oh, well, how come all the other nations, they get all this fish, garlic and onions? We just get manna. Like, can we get some of this stuff? Look at verse 18. Same chapter, verse 18 of Numbers 11. This is what God is saying. Say unto the people, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow, and ye shall eat flesh. For ye have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who shall give us flesh to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you flesh, ye shall eat. So God's like, you're going to eat flesh. You're going to eat meat. So get ready. And look at verse 19. God, isn't it great when God answers our prayers? He answers it fully, like nothing lacked, just fully, completely answered. And look at verse 19. It says, ye shall not eat one day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days. Like, man, he's about to have a feast. But even a whole month, until it come out at your nostrils. And it be loathsome unto you, because that ye have despised the Lord which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why came we forth out of Egypt? So first, they're complaining because we're sick of eating manna. Now God's like, all right, you're going to get sick of eating. What's going to happen is quails. They're going to get quails. They're like, you're going to get sick of eating quails. So here's another complaint. They're going to have another complaint. Probably. They probably had another complaint. Like, God, we're sick of this quails you gave us. We remember the fish, and the onions, and the garlic. We're sick of these quails. Get these quails away. And look at verse 21. It says, and Moses said, the people among whom I am are 600,000 footmen. And thou hast said, I will give them flesh that they may eat a whole month. Shall the flocks and the herds be slain for them to suffice them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to suffice them? And the Lord said unto Moses, is the Lord's hand waxed short? Thou shalt see now whether my word shall come to pass unto thee or not. And Moses went out and told the words of the Lord, told the people the words of the Lord, and gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and set them round about the table. So their prayer got answered. They were able to have a different set of food, even though they didn't want what God wanted. They didn't want what God was providing for them. Look at verse 31. It says, and there went forth a wind from the Lord and brought quails from the sea and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. So God plagues them, pretty much. It's just all these quails all around the camp. How are they supposed to walk around, These little birds just all around. And the people stood up all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. So we see here that the children of Israel complain because they have manna. They're not complaining because they don't have food. They're complaining because they have food. They're complaining because they're mad that they don't get, this special filet mignon, this well-cooked steak, these home-cooked meals. And they just get manna. So God's like, you'll have quails. And we see that today in our lives, that sometimes we get so comfortable, like, well, let's change something up a bit. But we just don't want to, we don't want to be content with what we have. So the Bible says, be ye content. We should be content for what we have. Now, if you would go to Numbers chapter 13. You say, well, they stopped complaining. No, if you read Numbers, they're complaining like almost every chapter. If you read the book of Numbers, they're never satisfied. God just delivered them out of Egypt, and another problem comes along. Oh, we don't have food. Oh, we don't have water. Oh, we don't have the food that we want. Another complaint on top of another complaint. Look at Numbers 13, and look at verse 30. It says, and Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we will be able to overcome it. Now, here they're about to encamp. I forget which country, what nation it was, but they're about to go into the country and seek it out and look around it and see it. And they just came back from here. And we need to read the chapter because I don't want to spoil this for you. But look at verse 31. It says, but the man that went up with them said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So the guys came back, and they gave a negative report. They gave a negative report, and they had a can't-do attitude. They said, we can't do this. These guys are too big, too strong, they're powerful than us, and we were just grasshoppers in their sight. We can't do this. The God, who delivered us out of Egypt, we can't do this. And they're complaining about that. And they don't see that God is with them. And here's the thing. If God is on our side, our enemy's defense means nothing. Because our enemy's defense is shattered, it's obliterated, because we have God on our side. We're going to crush them. Soccer score is going to be like 7-2. They're going to be defeated.
Actually, 2 billion to 0.
Yeah, you're right. Look at Numbers chapter 14. If God's on our side, we can't lose. It's impossible. If we read the Bible, at Revelation, we know how it ends. We know the ending of the story. We get the victory. You say, well, today it looks like, God, Satan's winning right now. It looks like it. Because we see the wickedness of the world. We see everything that's happening with Biden and all this stuff. We see all this, but we don't look upon what's going to happen at the end. You see, the wicked people, they're not going to live out half their lives. And you say, well, Biden's 70. He's old. Look, he's going to be in hell. He's not saved. He's going to be in hell. Then he can curse God. He's going to be cursing God, but for what? You're going to be punished in the presence of the Lamb. Well, you said they stopped complaining, right? They're done complaining. Look at Numbers 14, verses 1 through 4. This is carrying on from chapter 13. It says, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return unto Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. So they wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to bondage. Now, if you read in Exodus, God took them a different route, so that way they couldn't go back as easily. Because unless they saw the war that was happening in the Philistines, they didn't want to return back into Egypt. So God took them a different way, so that way they couldn't go back to Egypt. And now they want to go back to Egypt. But you see, they're seeing this little problem right here, and they're like, let's go back to bondage. Let's go back to where we came from. And you see, I remember I said this last week, in the Christian life, you don't go back, you don't retract, you go forward. Because remember, in America, the Bible compares the Christian life to a race. In a race, you don't jog backwards. You don't run backwards. You're running forward. If the line is at the other side, why would I go this way? I'm supposed to be going that way. In a Christian life, we run forward. We're pressing forward. But no, the children of Israel, they want to go backward. They want to go back and spiritually, go back there, instead of progressing. You want to progress in your Christian life. Look at verse 5. It says, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. So now Joshua, and Caleb, they're giving a good report. Like, this is a good land. And it says, this land which we passed through is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, that he will bring us into this land and give it us a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with them, with us. Fear them not. So this goes back to again, like, if God is on our side, their defense is nothing. God can wipe them out because God's on our side. Why should we be afraid? But look at verse 10. This really blew my mind. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. The children of Israel want to kill them. Like, get these people out. Because you're preaching too much of this, don't fear, and trust God. I'm sick of this. And it's like, what do you mean? Why kill them? You don't believe in God? You don't believe that God can deliver you out of this? You don't believe in the God that literally just delivered you out of Egypt? No, they don't. They don't care about it. They think that what they think is doing is right. They think that building them a captain to go back to Egypt is right. They're like, let's get a new leader, so that we can go back into Egypt. Let's get a new leader so we can return back into sin. Go back there. Go back in bondage. Go back to Pharaoh. Well, he's dead. Go back to the new Pharaoh and say, look, we will be your servants. Literally, think about it. They're literally going to go back to Egypt and we can be your servants. We'll come back. You can whip us. We'll be your servants. We plead. Because the wilderness is too terrible. Because we're trying, even though we're trying to, win a battle and we have God on our side, still, I'd rather just be with Egypt, be in bondage. That way, I can have fish, garlic, and melons, and leeks, and all this other great stuff. Look at Numbers chapter 16. Number 16. I don't know if you're there now. Or am I a little bit too ahead? Yeah, no. I'm fine. Number 16. Yeah. Number 16, verses 4 through 40. Whoa, that's too long. Verses 42. I was about to say 4 through 47. We're not reading. I always type out my notes, and I never proofread them. All right, it's done. All right, print. I hate proofreading. When we do essays in school, I teacher's like, all right, guys, proofread. I never proofread. Like, turn in A+. All right. The lowest I think I got on an essay was a B because she didn't like it. Doesn't matter. In Numbers 16, verses 42, not 4, it says, but on the morrow, all the congregation of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. Now let's stop and see. In Numbers 16, we have this guy, Korah, right? He was like, what is Moses doing? He takes too much upon him. We can all be, leaders. We can all do this. What does Moses think he's doing? Like, is he the guy in charge? No, we can do this. And basically, God literally opens up the earth and swallows because of all of this. And for some reason, me reading this and me having a brain, I don't know about the children of Israel, but they see, the earth opens up and God swallows them. And they think about, Moses, what are you doing? You just killed the prophets. You killed, these guys who actually are serving God. And they start murmuring against Moses and Aaron and thinking like they're the bad guys. Because they killed the people of the Lord. But look at verse 42. And it came to pass, when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, get you up from among this congregation, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a censer, and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly unto the congregation, and make an atonement for them. For there was wrath gone out from the Lord, the plague is begun. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people. And he put on incense, and made an atonement for the people. So God gets sick of this murmuring, gets sick of this complaining, and he just kills them. He's done with this. They fail to see the wickedness of Korah. So God plagues them again. God gets angry. And look at the transition between, like I said, in Exodus, we see God has mercy, like, all right, they're still not believing me, they're still not trusting in me. I'll just provide a way, I'll show them the way. And then in Numbers, you get in here and God's angry. It's like, how long is it going to be before these people realize that I'm on their side, that I'm delivering them, that I'm here to help them? The children of Israel are acting like God is a stumbling block unto them. Like God is not trying to have them delivered. Like God is not trying to provide them for their needs. Now, if you will go to Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 9. We look back at the children of Israel, like, what are they complaining for? They're literally in the hands of God. They're literally with God right there. Notice how they all talked about the bad stuff. We don't have any water right now. We don't have any food right now. Well, we have food, but it's not, the fish and leeks and onions. And like, we can't go into this. We can't possess the Anak. We can't go into Anak because the people of Anak were just too big and stronger than we. We can't fight that. We can't be delivered from that. They thought about all these can't do stuff, had a can't do attitude instead of can do. But they looked upon the negative instead of the positive. Well, what's one positive? Well, they're delivered, they're free, they're not in bondage anymore. What's another thing is that they did have food and they did have water. But I remember reading, this is like my second time reading my Bible. I remember I was in Nehemiah and I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. That their clothes were perfect. Like they had perfect clothes in the wilderness. Look at verse 21. It says, let's look at verse 20 actually. Thou gavest also thy good spirit to instruct them, and withheldest not thy manna from their mouth, and gavest them water for their thirst. Again, I gave them food and water. Yet 40 years didst thou sustain them in the wilderness, so that they lack nothing. Their clothes waxed not old, and their feet swell not. Now look at verse 22. Moreover, thou gavest them kingdoms and nations, and didst divide them into corners. So they possessed the land of Sihon, the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. So, them complaining about everything. They complain all about this stuff, and it was for no reason. They complained about not having food. They got that. They complained about not having water. They got that. They complained about not being able to possess the land of Anak. What happened? They possess the nations. They did all this complaining to God. And they didn't realize God has the solution. God is the solution to all your problems, everything. Well, you say, well, what's the application to this sermons? You know, all you did was just roast Israel, bro. You just talked about how Israel just is bad people. They're just horrible. You know, they don't understand how God is great, pretty much. And one thing is just remember God's goodness. Remember that God is always with you. Because we can look back at Israel and we can think, we read Israel or the children of Israel in the wilderness, and we're thinking like, man, these guys, there's something wrong with them. It's like, that wouldn't be me. Like, if that was me there, I would be like, guys, you need to look. I would be the one, not complaining. But in reality, we could be the one complaining. And today, we could be complaining. You know how many, there's so many people I see on like Instagram, like Christians, like, man, Trump's not in office. Man, we're about to be crazy, And it's just like, well, Obama was in office, and I wasn't going crazy. It's like, we have God, right? Shouldn't that be what we're trusting in? People have too much trust, and I didn't notice it until this year, probably because this is the only year I actually paid attention to politics, because I was too young, and I really didn't care about it. It's like, oh, Trump won. I woke up. When Trump won in 2016, I woke up. It's like, oh, okay. And I went to school, and everyone was crying. I was like, okay. I was like, all right. But I'm looking at it now, like, and Christians, they put too much faith in politicians. Like, they're going to deliver us. Man, if we can get this guy in here, he can deliver us. But it's like, don't you believe the Bible? I thought God can deliver you. I thought Jesus saves you, right? Didn't Jesus save? We sing Jesus saves. But when it comes to the elections, that's completely wiped out. No more Jesus saves. It's like the Republican Party can save us. And look, the Republican Party can't save us. God can only save us. Amen. Because if we put our trust in man, we're going to fall. It's no point. But we see, and like I said, remember, our enemies' defense will be obliterated because we have God on our side. But what's another thing that we can see from the children of Israel's, downfall and fall and murmuring and complaining is be content and be happy. In what state of life you're in, be content and be happy. Because I look at the book of Philippians, if you read the book of Philippians, it's always rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice evermore. I'm like, wow, Paul's really happy. He must be living it up. I don't know where Paul's at, but he must be living it up. Well, Paul's in prison. And he's telling us rejoice. Be in good cheer. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And he's in prison. But the children of Israel, they weren't rejoicing, and they're in the wilderness, and they're freed. Paul wasn't freed. He was in bondage. He was in prison. He's telling them, rejoice, rejoice evermore. And another thing, too, and I think this is the main application, the main point is this. Have a foundation. Because you look at the children of Israel, they're swaying back and forth. One minute like, yes, we believe Moses. We believe God's going to deliver us. Then the next moment, they're like, God's not going to deliver us. God, why did you bring us out of here? We should just go back to Egypt. And it looks back into James chapter 1. Don't be double-minded. Stand firm. Have a foundation. Aaron said, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? You don't want to, and a lot of Christians, they don't have a foundation. They just look around like, oh, whatever doctrine. Where's the doctrine at today? Where do I believe today? And it's like you can't have a conversation with these people because they're like, well, I feel, based upon my heart, that this is not what the Bible is saying. And it's kind of like, no, this is what the Bible is saying. But then they're like, well, that's how you think. That's just what the Bible says. It's like if the children of Israel had like enough faith and a foundation that they believe that God can deliver them, they wouldn't be constantly murmuring, complaining against Moses. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we do, in the Christian life, being like, God, where are you? Like, are you here? But he is there. And we look at the children of Israel, like I said, we can look at the children of Israel and think like, God's not here. Look at the children of Israel and just think they're just complaining. And like I said, we can just look at the children of Israel and just say, we're not going to be them. We won't be children of Israel. But in reality, we can sometimes be them. We can sometimes complain. We can sometimes murmur. And another thing, too, is that Christmas is coming up. And you see that everyone's like, I want the new PS5. That's all I hear about. The new PS5. Give me the new PS5. It's like, stay content with PS4. All right? Stay there. Just stay with the PS4. You don't need a PS5. I don't know what the difference is between those two. They all have PS and there's a different number. That's it. Elijah, I see your hand. I don't need to know the difference.
No. I have a PS4 Pro. I don't even know if there's like a Pro Max like the phone is.
I don't think that's a thing.
Phone
I don't think that's a thing. But okay.
Well, PlayStation 4 Pro is a thing, but I don't know if the PlayStation 4 Pro Max is. Like the something 12. Pro
Anyway, just be content with what you have. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's the Pro or the Pro Max or the PS5. Just stay where you have. Because in the end, it all does the same thing. You push a button. Let's have a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for me to be able to preach this sermon, Lord. I thank you for all that we're doing at this church, Lord. Let's remember to be content, be happy in what we have, Lord. Let us not be like the children of Israel, complain and murmur and always see the bad things in our lives. Even though there are things that we can look upon and say, oh, that's a negative thing. But let's also always dwell upon the positive, and let's look at the positive things in our life. And let's be happy that you're in our life, Lord, that we have you. Let's remember that you can deliver us from everything, Lord. And I pray that we just remember that, Lord, and trust in you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.